Hi everyone, I'm Ali, with a World of Warcraft versus video that's a little bit different than before. The basic principle of War versus is duel to the death between characters from the Warcraft franchise, but this time, with this first episode of Unfinished Battle, the duel has already happened or begun story-wise. The problem is, many fights in the Warcraft universe are disturbed, influenced or interrupted by outside parties or special circumstances that prevent us from answering that good old question, who's the strongest of the two? This is a way to settle history. English is not my native language, do not hesitate to correct my mistakes in the comments. This unfinished battle took place between the founders of the Alliance and the Horde, Anduin Lothar and Orgrim Doomhammer, at the climax of the Second War and just before the Battle of Blackrock Mountain. Having been betrayed by Gul'dan, Doomhammer had been defeated when laying siege to Lordaeron and was pushed all the way back to his fortress, where he was confronted by the full force of the Alliance army led by Lothar. The two war leaders agreed on a meeting at the base of the mountain to negotiate the end of the Second War. It is unknown how the meeting went through, but Lothar was eventually engaged into battle by Doomhammer and slain by the Horde. Orgrim hoped this would be enough to undermine the morale of the Alliance, but the opposite happened, as Lothar's second-in-command Turalion picked up his broken sword and led the army into a victorious charge. There is some degree of doubt as to whether or not this was a fair duel. It's a possibility that Orgrim was assisted by his troops, and this uncertainty is the reason for which this video exists. Both combatants were heavy armored warriors and seasoned veterans with intelligence and experience, but since this is an unfinished battle and not war versus, we will consider them as they were during their encounter and not in the prime.
The drums of war thunder once again.
Orgrim Doomhammer was an adult orc male born in the midst of the Blackrock clan, decades before the First War on the world of Draenor. A warrior and friend of the Frostwolf orc Durotan, Orgrim inherited the legendary weapon Doomhammer, forged by his ancestor Gernar from his father Telka, and became haunted by the prophecy surrounding the weapon, which stated that, "Through blood the weapon shall pass, as surely as nights begets day, until the elements cry unheard and pride turns to unbridled rage. The last of the line shall deliver salvation and doom upon his kind. Honor will be undone, and all will be lost before it is found again. A stranger will raise the hammer high, and with it justice shall reign." Young Orgrim attempted to renounce his destiny, but the angry elementals forced him to keep the hammer. Orgrim became the second-in-command of the leader of the Blackrock clan, Black Hand the Destroyer, not long before the First War. The both of them were convinced to wage it when Gul'dan assembled the Horde to cross into Azeroth, but Orgrim knew not to trust the warlocks in the beginning. His friend Durotan and Durotan's mate Drakar had warned him against him, and Gul'dan murdered him for it. When Black Hand was designated as war chief, Orgrim became the main war leader to rule the front line, and eventually realized that without Gul'dan, Black Hand was incompetent as a war chief and unable to properly set his troops and defend himself. When Gul'dan fell into a coma, Orgrim seized the occasion and killed Black Hand by surprise, as well as the entire Shadow Council. His coup having succeeded, he became the new war chief, subdued Gul'dan and the Horde, and was eventually the leader to win the First War. Refusing the domination of demons, Orgrim managed to enroll new races into the ranks of the Horde through enslavement, payment, or promise of plunder. This is how the goblins, ogres, and trolls first entered a Horde that finally resembled the one that would follow it. A military genius, Orgrim managed to seize victory after victory in his march toward Lordaeron. In the end, he was betrayed by Gul'dan, who abandoned the Horde with the Stormweaver and Twilight Hammer clan to seek the tomb of Sargeras. Orgrim had a choice between risking everything by cutting his forces in half to take care of Gul'dan, or ignore the dangers of a warlock to finish the humans off. The warchief chose to divide his forces rather than let Gul'dan live, and the Alliance managed to push him all the way back to Blackrock Mountain because of it, as well as destroy his fleet. In a climactic battle, Orgrim was opposed to the Supreme Commander of the Alliance, Anduin Lothar, whom he killed with a hammer strike after breaking his sword in two. However, Lothar's death reignited the spirits of the Alliance army, and his second-in-command Turalian led a devastating charge that managed to defeat the Horde and capture Doomhammer. Orgrim was kept in prison in the Undercity of Lordaeron as a trophy of war, but managed to escape captivity with his weapon and armor. Alone and understanding that this was the doom the prophecy had warned him of, he became a sort of a hermit, traveling between the surviving clans of Azeroth to find a way to rekindle the lethargic spirits of the orcs. Having grown old, he eventually encountered the young Frostwolf shaman Thrall, the son of his old friend Durotan, and intentionally provoked him into a fight by repeatedly stating that the orcs were a lost cause and nothing was to be done. Thrall won, and Orgrim revealed himself, pleased to have found someone ready to fight for the race. Orgrim and Thrall led raids against the enchantment camp the orcs had been trapped into, and on one fateful battle, the Blackrock orc was killed by a spear thrust in the back. Dying, he gave command to Thrall, along with his weapon and armor. The young warrior was the stranger announced by the prophecy, and the Horde was saved. The site of Orgrim's death was renamed Hammerfall in his honor, and the capital of the Horde was called Orgrimmar. Sir Anduin Lothar, the Lion of Stormwind, was an old human male born 51 years before the First War, in the Kingdom of Stormwind. A descendant of the Arathi bloodline, Lothar was raised as a knight alongside his friends, Prince Laenvrin and Medivh, the son of a court conjurer. Having joined the King's Honor Guard and then becoming an armsman of the Brotherhood of Horse, it was only natural that he would be Laen's right arm when the latter became king, and the Horde came from the southeast of the kingdom. After remaining imprisoned in the damn mines for almost 2 years while attempting to retrieve the Tome of Divinity, Lothar fought on the front line of the First War and was humanity's best hope at survival. Although the war was lost, Lothar managed to help Khadgar and Garona decapitate his former friend Medivh, the Mad Guardian, before he could bring forth a force of destruction that would have been much worse than the orcs. After King Laen's assassination, Lothar knew Stormwind had already been defeated, and fled the country with as many people as he could, taking the young Prince Varanvrin with him. Lothar's retreat, however, was merely a setback, taking the matter of the Horde to the human and dwarven kingdoms, and invoking the ancient blood debt the High Elves of Quel'Thalas had toward the Arathi bloodline. Lothar managed to unite the grand force that was to be known as the Alliance of Lordaeron, becoming its supreme commander in the Second War that was to come. During the war, Lothar notably induced many knights to become paladins and join Alonso's following the newly formed Order of the Silver Hand, from which he recruited a young second-in-command for himself, Turalian. By then, Lothar had grown old, and when the Alliance managed to ambush the Horde at the base of Blackrock Mountain, he was engaged in a duel with the warchief of the Horde, Orgrim Doomhammer, against whom he lost. His death, however, served to inspire the entire army to charge to victory, as well as the creation of a group of heroes known as the Sons of Lothar. Doomhammer and Lothar are both the founders of their respective factions. They're both powerful warriors and were rivals of comparable importance during the entire First and Second War. Is there need of more to see why this fight is interesting? Their final clash was a determining factor for the entire history of the Second War and the whole Warcraft lore. A different outcome would have changed everything. So how would the duel have gone if the duel had been fair? It may have, of course, but I guess we'll never know.
child. I watched with pride as you grew into a weapon of righteousness.
At the time of the Battle of Blackrock Mountain, Doomhammer was a powerful Blackrock Orc warrior in his prime, with a physique able to make him carry his heavy armor and warhammer into battle effortlessly. His body having been corrupted by Gul'dan's use of fed energy, he has not, however, drunk the blood of Manoroth, and did not benefit from its rage-inducing benefits. While powerful and quite fast in the battlefield, Orgrim is not exceptional, and despite his strength and resistance, he prefers to rely on his wit to defeat many of his foes, just like he did against Black Hand, precisely because he knows this is the best way to put his strength to use. When he was killed in battle by Orgrim Doomhammer, Anduin Lothar was a prematurely aged knight, a certainly capable warrior, and one whose body had been considerably weakened by age and strife. As a descendant of the Arathi bloodline, he was still quite strong, more so than most humans, and enough to fight in very heavy armor and a massive two-handed blade. At almost 60, Anduin Lothar was certainly one of the greatest warriors of the Alliance, but his body had started to fail him, a determining factor for his fateful duel with the war chief of the Horde. While Orgrim and Lothar are almost equals in many aspects, Lothar's age is a weakness that put his physical state far below that of Orgrim. In a pure duel of strength and endurance, the old human wouldn't stand a chance, especially if we remember that the orc's height and build naturally makes them much stronger than most humans. The physical edge goes to Orgrim Doomhammer.
Fight! Kill! Salute!
Orgrim Doomhammer was a strong and cunning warrior who knew how to defeat more powerful and even more talented adversaries thanks to his battle smarts. He does not hesitate to strike the first blow or attack by surprise, even if he upholds honor and respects his opponents. Despite this, Doomhammer is far from being a pushover in the realm of pure combat. His strength and numerous weapons make him able to lead the front line in any kind of battle, and just like his rival Anduin Lothar, it took old age and a treacherous attack to finally make him fall. Anduin Lothar was a knight champion, a member of the King's Honor Guard and an armsman of the Brotherhood of the Horse. Had he trained in the worship of the Holy Light, that he would have easily become one of the strongest paladins of the time. His skill in battle was a large part of what designated him as Supreme Commander of the Alliance, and he kept fighting for his entire life despite his advanced age. His fighting prowess allowed him to survive for years in the Dead Mines and live through the First and Second War. It took the greatest battle of his life for him to fall. We can consider him to be an expert fighter, able to adapt and match most of his foes. It's really quite hard to distinguish one from the other, given their respective talents in battle. Lothar is a more formally trained fighter, but Orgrim knows how to wield many weapons at once and always surprise his enemies, strategizing even in direct combat. If I was to give the advantage, I would feel that I would not recognize the strength of the other, and the balance could really tip in either direction. I believe that in terms of pure battle skill, Orgrim and Anduin are equals. This is a tie.
Halt, lad. There's an inscription on the dais. It's a warning. It says, "Whomsoever takes up this blade shall wield power eternal. Just as the blade rends flesh, so must power scar the spirit."
Orgrim's Doomhammer's equipment is composed of items that became legendary within the Horde. At the Battle of Blackrock Mountain, he was wearing the famous Doomhammer plate, a half plate made of an alloy of mithril and black iron he had made by goblins. His formidable armor was most likely to be as durable as the best dwarven suits of armor, and he eventually passed it on to Thrall at the time of his death. A rarely known fact is that he keeps many of Blackhand's fangs, short metal fangs given by Blackhand to his most powerful followers, as secret weapons attached to his belt. But of course, the most famous part of Orgrim's equipment is the one that gave him his name, the Doomhammer. Long before Orgrim's birth, his ancestor Gelnar sought a solution to protect the orcs from being enslaved by the Gorian Empire. He travelled alone in a state of meditation until a storm forced him to the steep cave of Gorgrund. There, the fumes made him hallucinate, and he eventually entered a pool of lava. The protection of the elemental saved him from certain death, and he used this gift to forge the hammerhead from the heart of Draenor itself. Adding an orc angle to it, Gelnar returned, and when he faced the ogres in battle, the elements rained down blessings upon him and the orcs, giving them the strength and fury necessary to triumph. The hammer was passed from generation to generation, until it came to Orgrim by his father Telkar, and the young orc had a hard time facing the prophecy attached to the weapon, fearing the doom he could bring to his own kind. When he wielded it in the First and Second War, Orgrim had the Blackrock emblem carved onto it, and wielded it with a longer handle, as well as a soul-like blade on top that could chew through the flesh of his enemies and use the Doomhammer as a heavy spear. Along with his blade, Orgrim passed on the legendary weapon to his second-in-command Thrall, thus fulfilling the prophecy of a stranger. Mounted on a powerful steed, he is used to riding and clad in very heavy armor from Stormwind, whose belt went to Varian Vryn, the rest of the armor having been recovered by Bran Donsbeard and exposed in the Horde of Explorers in the Iron Forge. Lothar's basic equipment is quite impressive. The matter of his sword, however, steps into the epic, although it is quite difficult to determine which impressive blade he actually wielded during the Battle of Blackrock Mountain: the Great Wheel Sword, Ashkandi, and Quel'Tharam. The first one, that was a great rune blade adorned in jewels, was officially the one that Doomhammer broke into and that Turalyon picked up. Ashkandi, another powerful rune blade, can be found in the game when defeating Levacher in Blackrock Mountain, and though it has a far more draconic look, it is called Sword of the Brotherhood, and has the initials AL carved on its hilt. Finally, it is known that when he was young, Lothar came across a magnificent high-elven rune blade called Quel'Tharam, the High Blade, by magic, and said sword manifested the inner strength of its wielder by emitting a golden glow around itself. It is actually quite similar to Quel'Tharam, also called the High Blade, but which was dubbed by Night Elves. Since Quel'Tharam's and Ashkandi's hilts are quite similar, and elven high blades actually require giant fire to be created, we can assume them to be one and the same. Turalyon kept the hilt of the Great Wheel Sword, but it is unknown what happened to the blade itself, and since it was lost in Blackrock Mountain, it is not unlikely to have been found and reforged by Nefarian. Besides, its description matches that of Quel'Tharam. We will thus assume that all three blades were one and the same, and for this duel, Anduin Lothar will be wielding the Great Wheel Sword that we will consider to be Quel'Tharam. This one is rather hard to determine. With comparable suits of armor, ancient magical weapons and a pose for Lothar, it's rather difficult to determine who has the best equipment. One certain thing, however, is that the Doomhammer was able to shatter the Great Royal Sword, despite its protective power, a fact that isn't surprising if you take their environment in consideration. Both characters are warriors, unable to tap into the true potential of their weapons, but the Doomhammer is an elemental weapon bound to earth and fire, and Mount Blackrock furnishes the precise terrain that can respond to the Doom's hammer underlying power. Furthermore, Orgrim's armor is so goddamn powerful that it withstood a direct strike from Manoroth, and Thrall still wears it more than 3 decades later. With these perks to come out on top, the equipment edge goes to Orgrim Doomhammer.
All my life I have lived by the sword. I've seen kingdoms burn, and watched brave heroes die in vain.
Orgrim Doomhammer, like many Orcs warriors, has been trained for combat since birth and saw more than his share of war and bloodshed. Chosen as Black Hand's second in command for his strategic talents, he participated in the genocide of the Draenei and led the Horde to victory during the First War, despite having to overthrow his war chief at the same time to seize power for himself. Orgrim is a cunning and thinking general, able to see through Gul'dan's ploys and recruit the most unlikely of allies. His diplomatic talents and strategic genius allowed him to storm Khazad-dûm and quell Thalas and Lordaeron, one after another, with almost no pause. Even in such circumstances, he managed to sow discord and betrayal among his enemies when he turned the kingdom of Alterac against its own neighbors and submitted all of the Horde leaders that were loyal to Black Hand, including his sons, Rand and Nine. His eventual defeat came only because of Gul'dan's betrayal, and even when he had lost everything, he still managed to rise back up and inspire the rise of a new, better Horde. Orgrim Doomhammer is certainly one of the greatest tacticians in the history of the Horde and the whole of Azeroth. As the peer of the prince of the fastest growing nation of the Eastern Kingdoms, a member of the King's Honor Guard and the Brotherhood of Horse, Anduin Lothar was already a seasoned warrior and tactician when the First War started. Able to wage 2 distinct great wars despite an obvious disadvantage, he made Doomhammer's conquest as difficult as possible, and had it not been for him, Gul'dan's betrayal might not have endeavored the Horde enough to save the Alliance. Lothar was a shrewd diplomat as well, and managed to unite all the bickering human kingdoms despite their differences, as well as the notoriously stubborn dwarves and elves, a commendable feat in itself. Thanks to his nomination as Supreme Commander, the Great Alliance was made into a force of might and magic to be reckoned with, the basic outline of the Alliance as we know it now. The perfect example of the qualities of a knight, Lothar inspired, by himself, the strength that gave victory to the Alliance, which proves his talent for leading others. The advanced age at which he kept physically fighting the war indicates how invaluable and shrewd he could be on the battlefield, and he is likely to be a match for opponents stronger than himself. Both world leaders are defined by their excellent strategic abilities, but where Doomhammer's race and age give him clear physical superiority, Lothar's age and location give him more advanced knowledge of battle tactics, and a wisdom matching his years. The two characters are thus comparable in their battle experience, but Anduin Lothar must gain the edge, since he is older than his opponent. The battle experience edge goes to Anduin Lothar.
In secret, I began harvesting what energies I could. I had a brief taste of true power.
Orgrim Doomhammer is, despite his great intelligence, a full-on warrior with no magic abilities to speak of. The only boon he can rely on are the elemental blessings ingrained in the Doomhammer, a piece from the Horde of Draenor, that was forged in lava by his ancestor with the help of earth and fire. The Doomhammer is a weapon meant for a shaman, and Orgrim is most likely unable to use all its properties, but the spirits are watching upon his destiny, and it must be enhancing his physical strength and endurance somehow. Besides, given the nature of the hammer, it should be reinforced by a strong presence of earth and fire elementals in environments such as Gorgrond or Blackrock Mountain. Despite his qualities as a knight and virtues comparable to those of a paladin, Anduin Lothar is a warrior, wielding no magic or spiritual power of his own. However, his weapon, the two-handed blade called the Great Royal Sword, would be considered to be the same as the Thalassian blade called Quel'Tharam, meaning the High Blade, and is known to be a rune blade infused with magic. It is said to react to the inner strength of the wielder, which Lothar must have plenty of, and manifested as a golden glow around the weapon. If we suppose that it has been created in the same way as Quel'Tharam, the Darnassian High Blade, and it has been enchanted with fire and blood from a dragon, and grants heightened defense and dodging to its wielder, which makes him very valuable. It is, however, the only magic Lothar may rely on. With so few magic to use, the combatants seem to be at a standstill in this area. The Doomhammer is a weapon of far greater renown than the Great Royal Sword, but if the latter is indeed Quel'Tharam, then its magical properties are fully available to a warrior, whereas the hammer is meant for a shaman. This would seem to put Orgrim at a disadvantage, but since this is an unfinished battle, the duel would necessarily take place at Blackrock Mountain, disregarding the need for neutral ground. The proximity of a volcano and the most powerful fire elemental of Azeroth, Ragnaros, is bound to enhance the power of the Doomhammer and even its match against Quel'Tharam. This means that no one wins a magical resources edge.
Faith is a powerful weapon.
So I'm told. The Alliance has the light from which to draw its strength. What steels this iron horde in its darkest hours?
Having been described as a magical rune blade, forged by dragon power but otherwise just pure magic, the Great Royal Sword's power isn't likely to use anything more than raw magic energy to defend its wielder, whereas the Doomhammer is empowered by the powers of earth and fire. In themselves, nothing opposes those kind of forces, and no edge may be gained from a magical comparison.
Pandaren tried to bury your hate and your anger, but such power cannot be contained. It must be unleashed!
At the time of his duel with Lothar, Orgrim Doomhammer was suffering from the Alliance's comeback and had endured defeat after defeat. His fleet had been destroyed and his army had been pushed back to its most powerful fortress, where they intended to make a desperate effort to hold their ground. At this point, he also dismayed by their sudden failure, and even Orgrim has to be affected mentally by this. Otherwise, he wouldn't even have accepted negotiations with the enemy leader. His hope of destroying the Alliance's morale by killing Lothar indicated fear of his enemies, the knowledge that if the humans remained sure of themselves, the Orcs would be in a very bad position. Besides, Orgrim has always been upset about the prophecy of a stranger, which states that the last of his line will both triumph and then doom his people. The Evans is currently living match through the prophecy. He knows he's going to lose, and his pride is the only thing that keeps him fighting even in the face of certain defeat. Killing Lothar is his last hope, the hope he doesn't really believe in, and Lothar's death was followed by the war chief's capture by Turalian. Psychologically, he's strong, but at his worst. At the time of his death, Anduin Lothar was an aged knight who had seen his king die under his care, had to murder one of his best friends, lost his kingdom in the war he was leading for it, and had been about to fail his entire race in another. The mysterious retreat of the Horde when Lordaeron was about to fall had turned the tide and gave the Alliance its only chance to save the world from the Orcs. When Lothar seized that chance and gave chase to the invaders, his heart was filled with hope, and most likely backed by the same titanic determination that motivated him to fight back for such a long time in spite of the odds. While he most likely fears that his lucky streak might end and that the Horde might come to its senses, regaining its strength to never let go anymore, this only empowers him to end the Second War at all costs and finally give closure to the dead of Stormwind. He won't let age or death stop him. For this duel, Anduin Lothar must be considered to be desperate, but at an all-time high in morale, enabling him to be his best for the most important battle of his life. Right now, for this particular fight, the result of this round is obvious. Orgrim Doomhammer is living the worst event of his entire campaign, and Anduin Lothar is chasing after an unexpected hope of victory. Even if in actual law Orgrim won and Lothar lost, it was the Alliance who defeated the Horde on this day, and for good reason. Lothar is more than ready to die for this victory. The psychological edge goes to Anduin Lothar. Anduin Lothar would have approached the negotiations he had proposed mounted on his war horse, intending to impress Doomhammer and knowing he'd likely have to fight. The same could be said for the Orc, who would have brought the Doomhammer spear and be ready to do battle at a moment's notice. Both would have met at the base of the northern slope of Blackrock Mountain in the Searing Gorge, surrounded by their forces. The armies would be staring at each other, eager to cleave through the ranks of the enemies while both Doomhammer and Lothar are thinking of how to keep their word together. With nowhere to accept a peace where they could not protect their people, both leaders would soon deduce the inevitable and, both deciding this is their better chance, would agree on an honored duel between each other to settle the course of the Second War. If Doomhammer won, the Horde would crush the Alliance and fulfill its conquest of the land. If Lothar won, the Horde would have to turn back and return from where it came. For Anduin, a loss would mean a fight his army had been prepared for anyway. For Orgrim, a win was his only chance to further his tensions against the Alliance and uphold what he perceived to be the honor of the Horde. Anduin will likely offer his opponent a chance to get on a mount, or if he wouldn't, the knight would himself get down from his in order to make this a fair fight. But Orgrim would refuse, stating that a human needed a horse to match any orc in battle anyway. After getting separated by a distance of about 10 meters, the warriors could start the duel, which would begin with Lothar dashing on his horse, his great sword ready to strike with full force. Orgrim would be anticipating this, and would slightly lower his knees, holding his weapon like a spear to plunge a slash or horse front legs at the last moment. Lothar is a seasoned warrior, however, and this is not his first charge on horseback. Switching directions at the last possible moment to surprise his enemy, the knight would use his momentum to cast a powerful strike from the great wheeled sword against Orgrim. Normally, the orc would prefer to dodge such an attack, but he knows how good his opponent is and how sturdy his armor can be. I think he'd prefer to use all his strength to parry full on, matching his strength against Lothar's to dismay him, before dashing in front of him to attack the human. Orgrim's intention would be to use a feint strike down rather than up At the last moment, Lothar would eventually understand his intention and parry, but too late to stop the attack. The slash of the great royal sword would cut the handle of the Doomhammer in two, letting the hammerhead fly and, guided by the spirits, plunge its sword into the horse's back legs. The beast would howl in pain and stumble to the ground with his rider, with Lothar trying to get on his feet as quickly as possible, and Orgrim violently jerking on the Doomhammer to rip it away from the wounded horse. The knight, angry at the fate of his steed, would quickly slash through the air, using the occasion to aim at the horse's head. Howling to give himself strength and cover the horse's screams of agony, Orgrim will make one final effort and use the leg bone as a lever to break the saw on top of the Doomhammer, pivoting it back to its original form and lift it against Lothar to parry the blow. The two weapons will finally smash against each other in a loud metal sound. Orgrim would suffer the most from the blow, the golden magic of a great royal sword protecting Lothar, and the momentum would force him to take a dangerous step back despite his raw strength. Knowing himself to be physically weaker, Lothar would press on and strike again and again, forcing Doomhammer to be in the defensive and use his hammer to parry some blows. After a short exchange, the knight would think he had found a breach in the orc's defense and sift his sword into it, aiming for the war chief's head. This, however, would be a trap set by Doomhammer to snatch one of Black Hand's fang from his belt, his secret weapon. Using all of the hammer to block the attack, Orgrim would then use his extensive reach to throw the small blade into Lothar's face. Having no choice but to recoil, Anduin would be protected by his sword's aura, and the fang would be deflected to the ground. Having time to regain his composure, Orgrim would thus have stopped Lothar's onslaught. Both holding on to their weapons, both combatants would look at each other, just for a second, before resuming the duel. The hammer and the sword would sing from both armies, clashing with the full might of both factions behind them. Orgrim was naturally more powerful, but Lothar would be able to match this with his magical protection, his cunning and his will, offering more than a match to his superior opponent. In a long fight, Lothar might have spared himself and be careful, preferring a slow approach and crafting an undodgeable death for the orc, but he was too old to last that long, especially against the war chief of the Horde. Orgrim was too alarmed and too strong, and he knew it. If the orc managed to get one clear strike in, the old man would be done for. Lothar would know this. He would know that despite all the advantages he had, his one shot at dealing enough damage to take down Doomhammer would be to match strength with the enemy and deal a fast, hard, and perfect blow, the best blow of his life. Harnessing all their respective strength, both warriors would run at each other, knowing this to be the end of one or the other. Lothar's sword, by matching the enemy attack to protect its wielder, would allow the knight to strike with abandon, leaving away his defense to deal every ounce of damage he could. Orgrim, despite his strength, is held back by his knowledge of the prophecy of a stranger. It will never, ever falter when the fate of and honor of the entire Horde is at stake. He'd raise the hand high, howling his war cry like his forefathers, and Blackrock Mountain would respond, empowering the Doomhammer with the power of earth and fire, a powerful upgrade to a strength that Lothar could not have anticipated, and the only fire aside from giant fire hot enough to weaken an elven high blade. The clash would be explosive, lighting the surrounding onlookers with light. What no one but the two warriors saw was the elemental power exploding and destroying Quel'Tharam's runic aura, before smashing the blade and breaking it in two. With this one movement, the warchief would then reach the Supreme Commander's head, now defenseless, and break his neck in a single blow. The Doomhammer would fall, and end the old man's life in a flash. All would see the defeated corpse of Anduin Lothar, when Orgrim, in a last act of defiance, would pick up the broken handle and throw it back at the humans to dismay them, all would see. And when Turalyon would pick it up and lift it high, enraged, invoking the light before charging and yelling, "For the Alliance!" all would see too. Both armies would clash and swallow each other as Orgrim faces the young second-in-command, and Lothar's broken body would rest there, not knowing that the Battle of Blackrock Mountain was to be the day the Alliance won the Second War. And there it is. It appears that if this duel had been fair and square, the result would have been the same. Orgrim did not have to be treacherous to defeat Lothar, even if the circumstances, the location, the state of mind heavily influenced the fight. Ultimately, it comes down to two combatants with similar equipment and talents, but one vast difference: age. Something a warrior can overcome only by inspiring those who are younger than himself. This is exactly what Lothar did. This was no easy win, but a win nonetheless. The winner is Orgrim Doomhammer, chieftain of the Blackrock clan and war chief of the Horde. Thanks for watching this video. Until now I've preferred to use only characters who are not susceptible to be affected by the lore anymore, mostly dead ones, but the Unfinished Battles series will allow me to recreate some duels where I can use Thrall, Illidan, Sylvanas, and so many others. It's a bit difficult to produce a detailed fight between two warriors, but I hope this one was interesting. The question of was Orgrim treacherous or no is a bit tricky for Orgrim fans, and I can at least say that Orgrim would have won this fight too if it hadn't been fair. We'll have more magic next time, with a duel between the two main lieutenants of Illidan Stormrage during the Frozen Throne and Burning Crusade expansions, Kael'thas Sunstrider and Lady Vash. Like and subscribe if you don't want to miss it, and until next time.